Well, Jay, let's see if we can figure this out. I was just looking at the flyer, and you're correct. It does have a different
Rats.
Zoom meeting number. I had not seen or caught that before myself.
Ah, shoot. All right, and then Mike, I must have sent Mike another one. I don't know how, oh my God, I got so many of these meetings. Looks like I sent him a third one, so I just emailed him. I sent him my text message, so let's see. All right.
Good morning.
Good morning. Well, we'll see if we've got quite a few already signing on to this one, and ultimately, obviously, we just need to sync the two Zoom meeting numbers that had different passwords. So it may take a couple minutes to make that happen and let people sign on from one to the other. So I think it's frustrating, but also fixable. So everybody, as people are signing on, just FYI, as we started this, we found that there was two different Zoom numbers that went out, and so we're trying to correct it now. So hang on, stay tuned.
Jay, if you'll send me the alternative Zoom number, I'll log off this Zoom, go into that other Zoom room, and update people that this is the correct number.
Dr. Smith, this is Melissa Chamis. I just did that.
Great, thank you.
And when I clicked the link on the flyer, it actually brought me back to this meeting.
Oh, wonderful. Good. Okay.
So Dr. Fisher, I'm not sure which link you are referring to. If it is something that's different than what's on the flyer, would you email that to me?
Yeah, I'm just trying to communicate with Dr. Nance, who I sent yet a third number to. That's an error on my part. 76417. Ay. This is not my strength. Organization.
It's okay. We'll get through this.
But I totally understand. It's why I needed help. I'm the same.
Yeah, it's I got too many balls in the air here. That's okay. And then the other thing is I realized this morning I woke up and that today was the holiday formerly known as Columbus Day. So that's all right. But let's see here. So welcome everybody that's signed on to this Zoom meeting. I apologize for the slight delay. I'm Jay Fisher, the medical director of the Peds Emergency Services Division here at University Medical Center Children's Hospital, Nevada, and UNLV School of Medicine PDM Fellowship. I have the good fortune of working with the esteemed Dr. Christopher Newton, who is the principal investigator for the RAPM project, the Western Regional Alliance for Pediatric Emergency Management. And our multi-state program has been working hard for about a year now, trying to coalesce opinion and develop some consensus on standards for approach to the preparation for pediatric MCI. I also had the good fortune of coming across a couple of great pieces of research by Dr. Michael Nance, who We are efforting to get on the program here. It's not his fault, it's mine. I've sent out multiple different Zoom addresses for this particular meeting. This is the new way of the world here. We're all juggling Zoom meetings. I think I see Dr. Nance having got on the line here.
How about now?
Oh, that's great. So sorry, Dr. Nance, for sending you on a Zoom witch hunt here. And thank you for getting on the line with us this morning on this, what I now realize is a federal holiday. Apologies to everyone for that as well. Our lives are all so busy and crazy. I didn't realize until 6 this morning when my wife said, it's a holiday today. And I'm like, oh yeah. So again, for those of you just getting online, we're here today with Dr. Michael Nance. Let me give him a formal introduction here. He is the director of the Pediatric Trauma Program at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which is one of the, I think probably the longest standing pediatric surgery program in the country. And he recently first authored and senior authored 2 publications directly on the topic that we've been working with here with the MCI subgroup of the RAPM project. And when we started the subgroup on pediatric MCI preparation and no notice event preparation, what we set out to do was to try to do our best to coalesce opinion and to reach some structure of standards or consensus across the West Coast and also the country on what our priorities should be for preparation for pediatric MCI, both at major centers like Dr. Nance's and at smaller facilities around the country that have seemed to have bared the burden of most of these significant pediatric MCI events. And so Dr. Nance was gracious enough to agree to come on short notice and without a lot of preparation to come on and speak with us about his experience doing this elegant research on pediatric MCI. And then I thought we would use that as a springboard for discussion with a backdrop of the previous webinar we had with Drs. Cools, Bittinger, Campbell, and Newton that we had back in August. And when we step back and look at this, that's definitely the first step, I believe, of getting a group of people of this magnitude, along with people in our group from the RAPM Project, Dr. Ignacio and Escobar, ped surgeons, and Dr. Betts, also ped surgeons who have been focusing on this problem for a long time. So with that as a way of preamble, Dr. Nance, thank you again for coming on to talk with us. And if you could go ahead and tell us a little bit about your research, perhaps starting with what initiated the process, what got you to start thinking about this particular issue.
Great, I appreciate the opportunity. It should be fun. I'm hoping to learn as well about the MCI stuff. We struggle with that, and I'd love to share additional. Let me fix the camera a little bit. We've been working on something with a multiple patient event, which is like a MCI light, and I'd love to run that by you guys and see what you think. And I appreciate the description of the research as elegant. I think when I talk about it, you'll see elegant may not be the right word. I think like blue collar is what might be how I describe it. But I think it works well and helps drive home the point. So I'll tell you why we kind of did it in a second, and I just sort of incorporated that into a little bit of an intro. I'll do talk a bit about the 2 papers themselves, and then at the end, I don't have prepared remarks about MCI, but I'm happy to participate in discussion and then talk to you about, or at least bring up the issue of a multiple patient event and see what you think and whether you have done sort of a similar thing. So let me see. I think I need to go back on, click share screen.
Yep.
All right, so are you seeing that?
We are.
Okay, I just want to see if I can drag this back over. That's not what I wanted to do yet. All right, I'll just present. I've got two screens and I was trying to get on the other one, but I really don't need that. So the reason for looking at pediatric injury is obviously it's the most common cause of death in the pediatric age group. The good news is that it's declined by almost 50% in the last 4 decades or so. So we're making good headway. The problem is it's still the leading cause of death, greater than all other causes combined. And then if you split out, do you see my mouse, the arrow?
That I don't see.
Okay, I may have to do something. Let me see.
You put in presenter mode?
I'm in presenter mode, yeah.
Oh, okay. So right now, all I see is the, working on it mode.
Okay, so but you see the slide. Let me
Yes.
just see if I,
Mortality 0 to 19.
there we go. How's that? Do you see the laser pointer thing? Still that doesn't come up either?
No.
Okay. All right, it's not critical.
If
But
you
the
click,
purple line,
you click slideshow and then start, because it may come up. There it is. Actually, we saw it now.
you see the red little thing dancing around?
So actually, sir, you're not showing the correct screen or the right window. So
Are you seeing it in,
I see your mouse moving around.
okay.
oh, I got it. So
So if you go back to share screen
yeah.
and then select the screen that's showing the slideshow itself, not the
Yeah.
PowerPoint file.
Under slideshow,
I'm talking about it's the control for Zoom.
Okay.
Back to share screen, click on share screen, and now select the screen that you want, that you actually have the presentation mode running on.
I have to get out of this, right? End show.
Sure. Yes, you do, because to see it, go back to the share screen button for Zoom. And now carefully select the actual screen that has that will have the show on it.
Yeah.
Do you have 2 monitors, sir?
Yeah.
Okay, so select the second monitor where the show is actually going to present. So you're going to do new share.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the,
So, so go ahead, click stop share on the Zoom controls.
yeah, see, I don't see the Zoom controls. I see,
So then shrink that file. There we go. Down at the bottom of your screen, which we're viewing right now, I see the Zoom controls.
you see them. I don't see them. Here we go.
Oh,
Meeting
wait a minute.
controls. Why is that showing?
Huh. Okay, click on the, click.
Oh, there they are. All right. But they're
Now-
completely on the other screen somehow, oddly.
Okay. So click share screen and be sure to select the correct screen that the presentation will be on, which should be number 2 probably.
Yeah. Okay.
No.
Now I need to go back.
There you go.
All right. So you're seeing it
Yeah,
in presenter mode or in the,
in the presentation mode.
all right. So I need to go.
So you can
There
drive
we go.
on the
All
other.
right. Now, do you see my mouse?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that works.
Ah, all right. Perfect. Okay. And then, can I go backwards? All right. So here we are again. So leading cause of death. Here's firearms. Purple is firearms, and the firearms are greater than most all other causes as well. So firearms as a percentage of the mortality is a pretty significant issue as well. And so that's one of the reasons I'm always been interested in the firearms issue. And then if this is just some data from National Trauma Data Bank, it looks at why kids die from injury. The most common cause of death in kids that make it to a trauma center, so this is from NTDB, is a motor vehicle, but in second place at a tied with falls are firearms. And if you look at this a little bit differently at those kids that arrive in a trauma bay and then die, the most common cause, the most common reason, highest case fatality rate is firearms by far. So about 4 times higher than motor vehicles. So if they get there, firearms are going to be the most common cause. And so it's a significant issue, I think. Lots of media attention on these mass shootings. So this was the one that I thought would change something, although you know, precious little has happened since this. This is the front page from the New York Times 2 days after the Sandy Hook shooting. And it's just a, you know, a headline that we never ever want to see. And if you look at the firearms, the mass shootings which have happened in recent years, this is all of the mass shootings that happened during the tenure of Barack Obama as president in his 8 years. And these are 5 dead, 5 or more dead, not including the shooter. And so you can see there were quite a few that happened over those 8 years. Since Donald Trump took office, the issue has persisted, if not worsened. And so now this is the number of mass shootings, same definition, in his 3.5 years. And so there were an average of about 4.5 mass shootings over per year during Barack Obama's tenure. And now it's about 10 or more per year on average in the Trump era. So it's continued to be an issue. And if you sort of look at them, you know, just overall, there are things that sort of start to stand out. I mean, many of these are happening in big cities, you know, Vegas and Orlando, Dallas, Houston, but many happen in smaller cities, Geneva, Alabama, Appling, Georgia, Piketon, Ohio. And so these aren't just big city issues. They're things that happen outside of the big cities. And then we'll see them in schools as well, Newtown, Connecticut, Oakland, California, Parkland. And so they're happening all over the country, different areas of the country, including rural and urban areas, and then areas where kids are frequently found. And so that led us to trying to figure out where do the victims go for treatment. So, you know, if they're in a big city like an Orlando or a Vegas, then you've probably got resources relatively close. But if they're not, how far are they from appropriate resources, and what kind of centers are they going to see? And then one of the other questions was, you know, how far are these events or where are they occurring relative to where kids frequently are found? And so that's what we were trying to figure out. And what we did was went to the Gun Violence Archive. And so this is publicly available data. It's updated essentially every day. It's updated with all shootings in the US. And then they have a separate tab for mass shootings. And so this was simply, we took the Gun Violence Archive. We looked at it for the entire calendar year of 2019. And you can see this is the kind of information that they would have. So this is December 29th, 2019. It happened in Danville, Illinois. There were 5 injured, no killed. And then it also has a link to the source. And so from this, we can go to the newspaper source. Sometimes there's multiple sources. And we can find out more information about the event, the location, and use that information for the studies. And so this is the first of the 2 studies. This one was published earlier this year in JAMA Surgery. And this looked at the hospital types and their proximity to mass shooting events. And so again, calendar year 2019. For this one, the definition of mass shooting was 5 or more victims. They could be alive or dead, and it could include the perpetrator. The idea was that 5 was probably a number that realistically would overwhelm many centers, even some of the bigger centers, even level 1 trauma centers that are kind of geared up. That's a number that's likely to be challenging. And so for each of these, as we showed on the gun violence site, you can get the location that the event occurred. And then we did geocoding from that and used Google, again, obviously publicly available. We used the information about the hospitals from the American Hospital Association, which has their geocoded locations. And then we had a list of trauma centers in the US, both adult and pediatric, level 1 and level 2. And we used the American College of Surgeons data, and also state data. So for instance, Pennsylvania is verified by a state entity, so they wouldn't necessarily show up in the American College of Surgeons data. So we had to supplement from any of the states. And so this is what we found. So for the calendar year, there were 187 events with 5 or more that were injured, and then they occurred in 38 states. Total of 298 killed, 953 injured, with a case fatality rate of 23%. On the figure of the US, you can see the dots. The dots represent where these events occurred. The size of the dot reflect the distance to the closest hospital. So in bigger cities, it's going to be a relatively small dot, or where there's trauma centers particularly. And then the color of the dot represents what type of center was actually the closest to where it occurred. And so most of these are red dots, and that's because most of these are closest to a non-trauma center just by geography. And from the pediatric perspective, patients were injured. Pediatric patients, so less than 18, were involved in 54 of the events, including 27 that were killed and 88 that were injured. And then this just graphically demonstrates the distance from the individual center types to the events which were occurring. On the top are in blue are the pediatric trauma centers, and you can see the distribution is much further. And so the furthest center was several hundred miles from a pediatric trauma center. That was a smaller event. But here's one of the larger events, which is actually a couple hundred miles still from a trauma center. The mean distance from event to trauma center was 43 miles. And it gets better as you go to adult trauma centers, where the mean is now 13, and it drops down to within 5 miles for a non-trauma center, so a hospital that's not necessarily does not necessarily have any trauma designation. These are the medians. So for those that prefer the medians, you still get the same distribution, where it's pretty significantly greater for pediatric hospitals. So a median of about 10 miles, and then for a non-trauma center, it's about 3.2. And then the number of centers that were greater than 10 miles, you can see it's quite a few when you're talking about pediatric centers. So if you need pediatric expertise, it's not always close. And if you are injured in one of these mass shooting events, most of the time you're going to be closest to a non-trauma center. Now, obviously, if you're in a big city, they may bypass that non-trauma center and get to an adult trauma center. We did not know and didn't comment on that in particular because we didn't have that information. But this is simply the idea was to show where these happen relative to the resources that are available. And so the comments from that is the events are pretty commonplace. The case fatality rate, not surprisingly, exceeds that of war. I mean, this is usually a small area with high energy weapons. The potential for significant injury is great. The non-trauma centers were the closest hospital. In fact, more than 70% of the time, they were the closest hospital. More than 50% occurred greater than 10 miles from a pediatric trauma center. And our main point in the whole idea was that all hospitals need to be prepared. So not just the trauma centers, but all hospitals need to have some kind of preparation and planning for how they would initially deal with events like this. And so the second question that we looked at was, where these happen within the communities relative to places where children are likely to congregate. And so this just came out in JAMA Pediatrics, but it's based on the same gun violence archive, same calendar year for 2019. We did change the definition to 4 or more victims, alive or dead. mainly because we had gotten some pushback on our first study with using 5s. Others thought that the definition should be at 4, and that's what FBI has and other groups. So we dropped it to 4 for that reason. It's still, I don't think the overall message would change, but it did increase the number of mass shootings. And the same thing, we used Google to determine the distance to several different things. The closest school, K through 12, and then other places of interest for kids, athletic fields, playgrounds, parks, rec centers, and zoos, all of which can be found easily on Google. And so we were looking simply the distance from the event found from Gun Violence Archive and the distance to one of these schools or places of interest. 418 events, so there are more events because the threshold was dialed down. 418 events, 40 states, 462 killed, 1,700 injured. Case fatality rate a little bit lower when you drop the threshold to 4, and 21% case fatality rate. Pediatric patient was involved in 121 of the events, or 28%, with 42 killed and 182 injured. And so just in a tabular representation, the median distance from the event to a school was less than half a mile. Overall, it was about 0.3 miles. It happened on site of one of those things, like a school or one of the points of interest that I defined, 6% of the time. So total of about 10% of the time, these mass shootings are happening on site of either a school or a rec center, a place of interest. And then you can see the distance to one of those sites. So the distance from a school, 11% happened within 0.1 miles, so very close. When you move up to half a mile, 60% are happening within half a mile. And then when you get up to 3 miles, you get about 96% of the mass shootings occur within 3 miles of the event. And then this is just sort of a different way to graph it. Here are the initial 20% that are within 0.1 miles. And then it gets sort of smaller and smaller groups. And when you're within a mile, you're at 91%. So here's the mile mark. And so within a mile, 91% are within a mile of a school or a place of interest. So they're pretty close to things that are where kids are going to be. So our comments from this: the mass shooting events occur deep within our communities, so they're close to where our kids are. They also have impact on the families and communities, more than just the victims, but because of the proximity, they're undoubtedly, people that are witnessing these, hearing the gunshots. So they potentially are impacting these families in the community in multiple ways. And so we really need to address all of the components to potentially make a dent. And so just a summary of the two together. So I would say the mass shootings are very common in the US now, very deeply ingrained in our communities, many, if not most of the times. All in the healthcare space need to be prepared. So not just the level 1 trauma centers, not just the pediatric trauma centers, et cetera. So everybody needs to have an idea of what they would do. And then I would also remind everyone that mass shootings are a small proportion of a gunshot wound. So while they've gotten a lot of the press and keep it in the public eye, which is, that's a good thing in trying to find a remedy, they actually represent a relatively small proportion. And so there are many other reasons we need to address these issues besides just the high profile mass shootings. And that's all I have. So I should hit unshare probably, right?
That's okay. You can leave it like that. It's fine.
Okay.
Dr. Nancy, so my wife's always telling me that my choice of words isn't perfect, but elegant to me means I can read a study in the 10 minutes before I fall asleep in bed and take away something from it quickly and rapidly. And so that your papers did that. So that's what captured me. And so to me, that is, and then I think it's just very clever using Google and other sort of non-medical sources for great information. So congratulations to you and your team on this publication. And it's just perfect because it speaks exactly to what Dr. Newton has been directing me towards the last year, which is the notion that, we basically, to make in layman's terms, we got to bring Stop the Bleed to small hospitals around the country to make the most impact. So, and that's what we've been trying to do with some educational modules and some webinars. So your research literally was on a platter to me, speaking to exactly what we've been talking about in our MCI No Notice subgroup over the last year for the RAPM project. So congratulations to you on that. Yeah, I mean, I took away from this that, once a month, there's a shooting at a school in our country, and twice a month, near a school, and that a lot of these occur very far from pediatric trauma centers. So so we can talk about a whole bunch of stuff politically and whatnot, but just to start off, just the medical side of it. Dr. Newton, you have a comment?
Oh yeah, no, I'm guessing we can have all sorts of comments at this point. So thanks, Mike. I think the data sets the stage for just a tremendous discussion. So, and I'll echo what Jay was talking about. So I think there's been some effort here to try to pull together educational modules or training programs. And there's several that already exist. So we're trying to focus on the most critical stuff for kids and exactly what should we deliver to, an adult community hospital. Or maybe the right target is adult EMS, providers, first responders. So let me start as you went through all this data. Let me ask your opinion. Who's the right target?
I think the right target is probably the non-trauma center. Yeah. So I think you have to assume that, I feel like I'm half cut off. I think you have to assume that most trauma centers, level 1, level 2 trauma centers, will at least have a pretty good idea of what they're doing, where to go, how to get the ball rolling. If they're an adult center and feel they need the peds input, they'll know where that is and how to set that in motion. If it's truly a mass casualty, the ped centers are probably in the loop. But the centers that may struggle the most are the non-trauma centers who may not be in the MCI loop, who may or may not be comfortable at all with kids. And so I think getting some basic information out to them, what to do if the event occurs at all, because this may be all adults. And so teaching them what to do, stop the bleed, things like that are good. And then what to do if it's an event with adults and kids, or kids, so that they know what to do and how to do it. And the plan should be known by the people that would be most likely to get involved, and that would be administration and the ED, I would assume. And so I think pulling them in just to let them know, I think, you share some of the data with them. I do agree that that was exactly why we wanted to do something this simple rather than going to like the kids database or some of these other things. One, you can't really find out where the events occurred, but this is just all you have. Anybody can sit in their study and pull it up on their computer and find the same information. And so it's all there. It's not perfect, but no data set is. Gun Violence Archive is pretty good at capturing stuff. If anything, it's undercounting. And so it may miss a few. So if anything, perhaps the problem is a little bit worse than it represents, but it's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
So, they can go and I would hope the same thing, kind of see data that's pretty straightforward, perhaps elegant, and just say, this is happening or bound to happen in your community. So particularly in a place, that's not Las Vegas, that's not LA, that's not Philadelphia, they also need to know. And so they've got to be ready for it as well.
Yeah.
Mike, Jay, and Chris, and everyone else, this is Jim. Sorry, I was meaning to send a chat out, but I can't get it to send, and I've got a patient here. But pursuant to your point, for every mass shooting in the U.S., there are numerous others that are in the planning stages that are interrupted by law enforcement. And this could be your local city PD, county, state, but most likely it's going to be federal. The FBI thwarts a number of these probably every month. So I think the risk involved, especially for those communities, just as you said, that don't have the resources, having the most preparation and format to be able to deal with this is clearly seminal to decreasing deaths and injuries.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, let me ask you your opinion. If sorry, so if the adult non-trauma centers are target, the most high yield person sitting in a exercise or conference room or drill is the ED doc, adult ED doc. So, and Jay and the team have been working on content of, all right, if we're going to try to impact those individuals, the next question is, what's the right message? And and I think potentially there's several things. So and Jay's already put together a module of mass casualty triage philosophy and how to do it with kids. And clearly that's a little bit different with kids than it is with adults. You could have pediatric, pearls, for the adult provider, which one of our ED fellows is kind of working on a manual for that. We could have guidance on when do you keep and when do you just move quickly, stabilize and transfer, an hour away. I guess the question is, what is the biggest bang for your buck of pediatric specific info to get to those places? What's the content?
I think if they can do an introspective look, understand what their resources are. And so are they a place that if they had to, could they rouse some surgical backup to take that kid to the OR, or do they just simply not have that at all? And so in the best of circumstances, they will not be able to take care of that. And then understanding who to contact, how to contact them, and having that readily available so that, at 2 a.m. when this all goes down, they know how to get in touch with people and who that is. I think the other piece is making sure that there's a big effort about pediatric readiness. And, that's one of the easy ways, looking at some of that information about pediatric readiness. That's just for EDs in general, that's not trauma specific, but making sure they have the basic equipment that you need to care for a child so that they don't show up and they're completely flat-footed. And that may be the place to start and the most bang for the buck with most places. And then many places may already be there and have done that. And you can start giving a little bit more focused information, some of the management principles, at least to get them going. Stop the bleed can probably be a part of that as well.
Yeah. And we do a lot of work with the Peds Ready group, and we're pretty well integrated. So it's a comment that you bring up that maybe the mass casualty scenario can be, an educational toolkit within that bigger paradigm.
Because they'll play. I mean, I think what this shows, if this is in a city, so some of this data will be, from like Orlando, for instance, and there was a trauma center just down the street from the Orlando shooting. And so that, that's easy. But if these centers are the one that's closest and something else is not all that close, and you've got an EMS crew they're going where they can get somebody right away, even if that means, they could drive another mile, but they're worried they can't even do that. So if you are between the event and up higher level care, you may be the one that gets that patient, and you got to figure out what to do with it. So I think sort of driving home the point that these happen in our communities, it's not just big cities, are the kinds of things that they just, really, I think will hopefully let them see that they've got to do, some efforts to know what they do in that setting.
Yeah. Well, I'll also acknowledge, and I say this because I've run into this comment as I've been going around trying to figure out what should be done in this venue. I'll acknowledge that when you begin to talk to adult providers at adult trauma centers who are very well experienced, they know what they're doing, they've got algorithms, or adult deployment strike teams. These are folks that are really experienced. You throw a kid into the algorithm and they are suddenly terrified. And suddenly they don't know what to do. And so I agree with you that the biggest bang for the buck on the population basis is the community hospital. But I also don't want to forget the fact that, there's adult trauma centers out there with surgeons who, are scared of touching a kid.
Yeah, I think they have to understand what their limits are. And, many times that a skilled adult trauma surgeon is going to be probably, perfect for that kid anyway. I mean, it's going to be able to get that kid. They may not enjoy doing that operation just because it's sort of out of their comfort zone, but
yeah,
I think they have the skill set that they could. And it may be that just like, some of the distance to the pediatric trauma centers in many of these events was pretty significant. And so, they may go to a non-trauma center and then they've got to figure out whether they're going to airlift a huge distance, or they may go to the trauma center because that's pretty close and you still have a great distance. So that adult trauma center is probably going to get pretty involved, and depending on the distance to travel, they may have no choice really but to get that kid to the OR. And so, I think if they fall back on what they know, they're going to be right the majority of the time for, most of these injuries. And it's a reasonable place to start, but I think the same thing, understanding their limitations and then how to get those kids to the appropriate care is important for them as well.
Yeah. Well, I love your work, sir. Please let us know how we can help you as well. So, as you're doing this, we're, there's a lot of folks here that are passionate about it. We'd, love to help if there's an opportunity. Jay,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take over your discussion.
No, that's okay. I know what it's like to talk to a colleague you haven't talked to in a long time about your craft. It's a weird symbiosis thing. I get it. Dr. Nance, I thought I would throw a few things in there. We've done some unpublished research. We're hoping to get published at some point. That I had access to a fair number of pediatric centers, and we surveyed them. Dave McCarthy and I. And we got 40 pediatric centers out of 150. I'm still reaching out to others to answer. Some of these, about 15 of them were large, what I call sort of national children's centers, including places like CHLA and Seattle Children's. So about 40 some odd sites that were pediatric specific. And we asked some very simple questions about pediatric MCI no notice event preparedness. And we used as a backdrop for that our 10-1 experience here, because the morning of 10-1, I went around and said to myself, good Lord, what if this was a bunch of kids? And noticed that we didn't have 10 pediatric intubation trays, for example, on site. And I was curious then about what other centers had. And so at least a third of these centers did not have 10 pediatric intubation trays. So if you want to talk about causing panic, all of a sudden a bunch of kids coming in needing airways, and you open up a couple intubation kits, and then suddenly you're done because you don't have any more equipment. And the same was true for chest tubes and cat tourniquets and all these types of things. So we began discussing, what about the national stockpile? Is it time now that, will that get somebody's attention? You start asking Congress for additions to the national stockpile, saying, oh yeah, by the way, because we're having all these mass school shootings, we need to have war zone type equipment caches at these pediatric trauma centers. How about that? And does that surprise you at all, Dr. Nance? I don't know what you have at Children's of Philadelphia.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can answer that. I'd have to go and ask how deep our intubation. I mean, all that stuff is somewhere. I mean, somebody could go start running and get it up by the OR, but immediately available in the trauma bay or in the ED, I would doubt we're that deep.
Yeah. Right, and so we looked at the Marjorie Stoneham Douglas case and the Santa Fe shooting in Texas, and the Sandy Hook, and we said, we have all these doses of atropine and Tupam for a sarin attack. What about this? And what are we going to do when you don't have 14 French chest tubes laying around? That kind of thing. So that was very, very concerning to us. The other thing, as you probably know, is that you have to rig a cat tourniquet for upper extremity on every kid under 5, right? And that's not, I don't think, common knowledge. David McCarthy taught me about the SWAT-T, which I was unaware of, and how many of those should we have distributed around the country at these community hospitals? I mean, these are things that the community is going to be expecting us to know how to do. And I think the Boston Marathon shooting showed us that, conventional tourniquets in the hospital aren't going to get it done for these types of wounds. So we've got a lot of work to do on this. And I guess that would be do you have a plan for this, taking this data? What is your plan to turn a little bit politically in terms of say, what do you intend to do with this data?
Well, we haven't pushed it yet, but we hope others will use it and use it to drive their own agendas. So it's out there. It's a lot of stuff has gone on the back burner with the pandemic to some extent, which has been, distracting from moving on some other things. But I hope to use this. There's a bunch of firearm stuff that we've got, and we try to build a case, not just around MCI, but firearms in general. So that it was more the firearms piece than the MCI piece that was driving me with this. Just happens to overlap.
Let me ask you a question about one of the other webinars we had. Dr. Bittinger from the Boston Marathon bombing, his emergency physician, obviously working closely with the surgical team there at MGH. And one of the things that he brought up, and I think Dr. Campbell at Children's of Connecticut thought this was a good idea as well, is to revisit the triage systems that are currently being promulgated for mass casualty situations, and perhaps simplifying them. And Dr. Cools thought this too, is that now that I recall that in an MCI situation where exsanguination and hemorrhagic shock are the things that are going to largely kill people, should it just be dichotomous? It should, forget about this sort of, black, gray, yellow, green, red, just, resuscitate, don't resuscitate, sort of a binary type of a system. Have you looked at that stuff at all and talked about that at your facility?
No, we haven't. But when you mean binary, it's binary has an opportunity and go to the OR, or binary unsalvageable?
Yeah, binary go to the OR, or binary stop and resuscitate this patient. The systems in place now are, even though they're simple and they're sort of 5-tiered, color-coded and things of that nature, and they've been talked about by a lot of specialists, I think in the heat of the moment, when we're going to take a plan out to a community hospital, I think there might be some merit in saying, let's get this as simple as absolutely possible. And we all recognize that repeat triage is going to be essential in all these situations as well. But perhaps it should be discussed that it just goes, you know, work on this patient, don't work on this patient, move that one to the re-triage group, that kind of thing. When we're talking about literally situations where dozens of patients are coming in at once.
Yeah, it's hard, and that may be where, I don't know if I would expect that would make it more challenging or less challenging. If you start sending a bunch up and then you're, the ones that are not necessarily as obviously critical start rolling in, you know, you'll be inundated, but I guess you'd be inundated either way. I think if you get into that, your system's going to be challenged pretty dramatically. Yeah, we have not looked at that. You know, I think those patients look sick quickly, and so they're going to get pegged to go up quickly no matter what. And so I don't know if you create a separate, you know, binary choice, whether that expedites them or not. Because I think they're, you know, I don't know what the metric is, but I know it when I see it, kind of thing, that old adage. They're going to look pretty ill. So they're going to get up. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, just to clarify a little bit of the binary discussion, it's an interesting concept, and I don't know if it will work, but the simplicity of making a few statements that it's really rare to call a child expectant. No, you know, no provider wants to put any child in that category. And when you take that category off the table, you're left with our day-to-day routine, high-level level 1 trauma or level 2 activation. They're either urgent or mild. And we do that every day. So does all of EMS. And maybe for a kid, unlike an adult, that's all you really want to answer.
Is whether they need to go up.
Yeah, either they're really scary or they're not urgent. And really scary, all right, I'm willing to separate really scary from their mom, get that kid to, you know, to a peds hospital or get them right to the OR. The urgent kid, yeah, I'm not going to put the urgent kid in a helicopter. Excuse me, I'm sorry, the non-urgent kid. I'm not going to put that kid in a helicopter.
Yeah, well, particularly if you're sending them to a center that's now being challenged.
Right.
So if you're doing triage at the, whatever it is, non-trauma center, trauma center that's triaging to an adult center, you know, you hope that they're taking some of that into consideration and not inundating with both, so that you just have to go through a re-triage process.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be uncommon that, you know, an event they distribute patients to several centers and they're all trying to send it to a ped center if it's multiple kids. And so you're getting different levels of patients coming from different centers, some who are able to take care of trauma patients well, but this is a kid, and others who can't take care of adult or pediatric trauma patients. And so they're sending it. And so you've got to figure out how to mesh those, and that can be challenging.
Yeah.
We're getting a couple of questions from the group here. I was efforting that, and Katie Giordano said, is there any historical data that we know about whether PEDS facilities have actually designated patients expectant versus adult facilities? I don't personally know of that.
I don't know either.
Do you know that data?
Yeah, I don't know of data other than, I guess, just anecdotal in the events that I've been involved with. It's, you know, it's not something that anyone feels comfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, I always just tell my PEDS doc the night of 10/1, you know, I wasn't on duty that night, but he called me and I was talking to him, and he was, you know, he was talking to me about cases, and it is interesting. One of the cases that there was a person with a GSW to the head that that was getting a surgical cricothyrotomy, and he kind of commented to me, "Is that how we're supposed to be doing it?" Like, I thought that was like expected. As it turns out, that patient with the GSW to the head on 10/1 walked out of the facility. And just a great example of how the best laid plans, you know, can sometimes, and right. So, and I agree with you, Dr. Newton. After 30 years of, you know, intubating kids and trying to resuscitate kids, like someone that died of hemorrhagic shock, it would be hard, you know, not to know when to stop. They're so resilient, you know. So,
Yeah.
I think that's even, I mean, that concern gets even greater when you move out of the pediatric world, where at least you sort of have a better sense of whether they're going to live or die, or at least feel like you made the decision, you know, to the best of your ability and knowledge. If you go to a trauma center, adult trauma center, non-trauma center, making that decision can be emotionally devastating.
right. So, and then Mr., or I'm not sure if this is Dr. Rubin or what his role is, but Jeff Rubin was asking about, might there be room for an ATLS type course, which is mobile and taken to community hospitals? And then there is such a course, you know, the ACS disaster preparedness course that we don't take it on the road here, but we do deliver that course through the trauma department here at UMC. But that's what we're working on, actually, is this, that was Dr. Newton's vision, was to have such a course. And I've created with the help of Dave McCarthy and others, to help try to create a narrated slide set, which I already want to edit based upon the webinars that we've had. And that talks about just this topic about community hospital preparedness for these events. And
I guess, you know, the hard part is that you've got to get that community hospital to buy in and say, this is enough of an issue to pay for attending the course or sending people to the course. And, you know, that may not make it through a, you know, administrator's cut of what they, you know, what they feel necessary. This will never happen to us, or, you know. So that's the hard part about it. The course is there, and it can help educate many of the centers that are kind of already in the trauma system to some extent, whether like the level 3, level 4 resource centers. But getting to the non-trauma centers may be a challenge.
Yeah. Well, and I'll also add, you know, Mike, you made just a fabulous point earlier about, you know, it depends on each hospital's internal resources and your internal review of what do you have and what do you need. And okay, we can go out and give a course, but one of the messages of that course is, you know, you gotta do this exercise. You gotta look at your ER and see, you know, what you've got and go through the plan. And you know,
Yeah,
I can teach you how to, you know, how to intubate a kid, but that doesn't necessarily help your individual hospital.
yeah.
I would just say, Dr. Nance, that what I've noted over the last year in working with RAPM was there's a sense of shared vulnerability that is commonplace now, that to like which I haven't seen before with regard to disaster. We certainly, amidst all the craziness that we're in with COVID right now, there definitely seems to be some receptiveness to these ideas of be prepared for the crazy situation more now. I do think we're moving into that era where I've always, and this is another thing that we've worked on with RAPM, is that I've always been a little bit befuddled by the fact that my facility, that we not only do we have to be ready for the 10/1 disaster, but we also have to be the flu hospital of choice at the same time. Can you imagine if those two things happened at once? You know, you get a trauma center that's inundated with influenza at the same time. You know, you can create all kinds of scenarios now, but I think people are coming around to the notion that this is the work that we've been doing this for years, and is this the smartest way to do all this? You know?
Yeah. Well, and it's a not if but when feeling, I think, for a lot. You know, it's not is this going to happen? It's when this is going to happen, and it's kind of, you know, sort of bound to get, you know, at some point it's going to coming to a hospital near you.
Yeah, exactly. And then I was just asking one other question. What kind of, have you gotten any other attention or feedback or interest in your studies at this point? What was the initial feedback that you got from your work?
No, not a lot. So, I mean, it's hit some of the audiences and gotten out, but no direct feedback.
Well, it's interesting because when I announced your coming on to the RAPM webinar, I started getting, you were like a little mini rock star. I started getting all these emails saying, well, I'm busy that day, which I should have known was because it was a holiday. But can I get a recording of it so I can hear Dr. Nance speak? So you've definitely got a fan club out there.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'll sign autographs later.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you're welcome to share. I don't know if it's video or not. You're welcome to share that. I'm perfectly happy. You're welcome to, to share the data. If anybody wants to know how to do it, it's pretty easy. So if they want to sort of continue on with it, it's, I as a surgeon, simple always seems the right answer, and that was the reason for this approach too. It's just very simple, very straightforward, and I think it if anything is better received than overly sophisticated things. We don't have any viral vectors, and there's no PCRs or anything like that involved in here. We didn't kill any animals in the research. So it's,
if the words bone Ferroni correction are not in your manuscript, I'm very
exactly. If I need a statistician just to read the word, then I'm in trouble.
Yeah, actually, one of the projects that we're interested in doing is taking these webinars and the slide sets that we're working on and seeing if they have an impact in the communities. And so Dave McCarthy and I in Arizona, we're looking at a few facilities around this area like Reno, Nevada, in Fresno, or Bakersfield, California, Tucson, Arizona. If you, Dr. Nance, have any facilities in your area that you think might be willing to participate in that type of a thing where we give them some materials, do some pre and post tests, and see if they learn something, see if they like it. If you can think of a facility or two in your region that might know your name that would be interested in doing that, we'd be interested to learn that as well on our side.
Yeah, I mean, it's a robust medical community in the area with half of our population is referred in. So there are a lot of centers in the region that potentially would have interest, I would think.
Very good. Okay, well, we're about an hour at this time. If anyone else has any questions, please feel free to jump in here. But I just wanted to start my profuse thanking to Dr. Nance for taking his holiday weekend and spending it with me on this electronic platform and putting up with my errors and questions and stuff. But I greatly do appreciate, Dr. Nance, your time and your work. Hopefully I get to meet you someday or hear you speak in person when this crazy COVID stuff is over with.
Yeah.
But thank you.
It's been kind of crazy with all the lack of meetings. You realize, I mean, I do hope it gets back to that. I mean, you realize a lot of things can be done electronically, but I think there are a lot of things that are lost in the translation when you take the human element out of it, and reading the audience, meeting the people, the side conversations in the hallways kind of thing really often are as impactful, if not more impactful, I think, than the main stage. So I'm ready to get back to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm in the elevators here. When I'm in an elevator with a bunch of people, I say, we're halfway there. But then I've been saying that for about 2 months now. So
Yeah.
I think they're starting to doubt me.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, that sounds good. Hey Jay, I've got to run to see some patients, but I just want to echo Mike. Thanks for sharing your stuff. So and sincerely, the other way around, if we can help you with your efforts in Philadelphia, let me know.
Terrific. Appreciate it. Well, enjoyed.
All right.
Good luck to all.
Everybody, thank you.
I'll see you.
Thanks.